Hey everyone, welcome to Morphology, which is the second last unit in Linguistics 101. In this set of videos, we're going to talk about morphology, which is the study of words and word formation. We'll mostly be talking about English, so we'll talk about what a word is in English, what pieces make up a word, and how words and word parts can compound together. We'll also look into the morphology of other languages and see how we can analyze them without being native speakers and figure out what is a meaningful unit and what isn't. But first, let's talk about what a word is. Well, a word is the smallest free-form unit in a language. What we mean by free-form is that a word does not need to occur in a fixed position with respect to neighboring elements. In many cases, words can be used in isolation and have meaning. For example, let's take the sentence, "I like dogs." I think here we can all agree that I, like, and dogs are all great individual words. But at the same time, we would say that the plural S on dogs isn't a word. So the question is why? Well, we can say things like I, which means me, and like, which means to enjoy something, and even dog, which is a four-legged furry friend. And we can say these in isolation without there being much meaning change. But what about that word s? It doesn't seem to have a whole lot of meaning in and of itself. It sort of needs other things. Further, we can move around these words without causing too much trouble. So in the sentence, dogs are liked by me, that's fine. But the sentence, stog are liked by me, doesn't impart the same meaning. The plural S seems to need to attach to the word dog here. Just like the ed or ed seems to need to attach to the verb like. It can't occur on its own. Some words can be moved around, like we've seen, but they aren't used in isolation. These are often called grammatical words, things like are, is, be, were, etc. So, the word are can move around between the sentences dogs are great and are dogs great? But we don't really have a whole lot of meaning if we just say are by itself. If you go up to someone and say are, the first thing that'll pop into their mind is probably that you're a pirate. Okay, so we have a definition of word, at least a useful one and a consistent one. But what about those little bits like s or the ed in the word liked? Well, these units are something we call morphemes. Morphemes are the smallest pairing of form and meaning. When we say form, what we're talking about is phonological or phonetic form. Now, this gets significantly more complicated the higher up in linguistics you go, because suddenly form can mean a whole lot of different things. But for this course, we're going to focus only on morphemes as a pairing between form and meaning. So let's take a look at the sentence, dogs are great. How many morphemes do we have in this sentence? Well, let's take a look at the word dog first. We call this a word, but we can also call this a morpheme. We can't break this down anymore. It's not like d means four legs, o means furry, and g means friend. Those are all phonemes, but they're not morphemes. So the smallest unit of meaning that we have in the word dog is simply the word dog. What about that s ending, the plural s? Well, we would say this is a morpheme. It has the meaning of plurality and has the form of s. There's nothing more to break down here, so we'll say that this is also a morpheme. What about the word are? Well, this is a word that means to be. It It does have to do with plurality, but for now we're going to put that aside. Are in this case means to be, and we would say that it is a morpheme. There is nothing we can break it into, so it's just one morpheme. And then finally, the word great. It's very similar. It is a word, but it is also a single morpheme. There's nothing to break down. So in this example, all of the words except dogs are what we call monomorphemic. That is, they have a single morpheme. You can also call them simple words. Conversely, dogs is multimorphemic because it has two morphemes. Let's call this a complex word. Now, the number of morphemes that a single word can be made up of is actually quite high. We'll easily see cases of 3 or maybe 4 morphemes in English. But in other languages, this can get much, much higher. So let's talk about free and bound morphemes, which are two flavors of morphemes. A free morpheme is one that does not require any other morpheme to grammatically occur. All monomorphemic words are free morphemes in English. These are things like cat, or dog, or monster, or or the. A bound morpheme, on the other hand, is a morpheme that cannot be used by itself. So let's think about our previous examples. In the word dogs, dog is a free morpheme because it is meaningful on its own and grammatical on its own. It's a word by itself. The s at the end, the s, is the plurality morpheme, but is it its own word? Can it be used on its own? We can't say like, s are great to mean plural things are great. And so we would say actually that s, the plural morpheme, is a bound morpheme. Let's look at an example from Plains Cree, though. In Plains Cree, there are many words that refer to family members and body parts that are bound morphemes. So let's take a word like Nikowi, which means my mother. You can also see Kikowi, which is your mother, and Okawia, which is his mother. Now, if we pay attention, we'll notice that all of these forms have this chunk kawi to them. For now, we're going to actually ignore the A at the end of Okawia. It's a secret, doesn't really matter. If you really want to know more about it, I'll talk about it in the office hours. But let's just focus on the fact that all these forms have this gawi to them. If we look at their translations, we notice that they also all have to do with mother. So all 3 words have kawi and all 3 words have to do with mother. Let's go out on a limb and say that kawi means mother in Plains Cree. Well, in this instance, we can't say gawi by itself. It needs to have the ni for my, the ki for your, or the o for his. And because it can't stand on its own, we would say that although gawi is a morpheme, it is a bound morpheme. Interestingly, there may be multiple morphemes that correspond to a single meaning or concept. So let's take the word This is what we call a determiner, or what non-linguists call an article in English. And when we have it in front of a consonant, we say like in a dog. But when the next word starts with a vowel, we say an, as in an elephant. In this case, though, and an are referring to the same meaning. They're both indefinite morphemes that give the information of some version of whatever noun. Because they don't share the same form, but they do share the same meaning, we say that they are allomorphs. Now, this should remind you of how we created allophones in the phonology unit. Allomorphy is very common throughout languages, and we have a couple of pretty common examples in English other than the one that we just saw. So if we take the plurality morpheme, In the word dogs, we see that it's spelled D-O-G-S, and in the word cats, we see that it's spelled C-A-T-S. Now we know that this S is the plurality marker in this case, and we notice that both dog and cat attach to this plurality marker. But we don't say dogs and cats, and we don't say dogs and cats. In reality, what we have here are two different forms that happen to be, in English, spelled the same. Now, often I'll just be using English orthography for this unit, but there will be some times where the sounds differentiate something, in which case I'll be using a phonemic or allophonic variation. So in this case, we can see that we say dogs with a voiced z and cats with a voiceless s. So we might ask ourselves, well, why would this be? If we had more data, I think it might become clear, but let's just take these two examples and pretend that this is the entire language. If we look at the preceding contexts here, we notice that dogs with the voiceless version has a g before the plural morpheme, while cats with the voiceless version has a t before the plural morpheme. If you remember the last unit, you'll remember that g is a voiced velar stop, and t is a voiceless alveolar stop. The eagle-eyed viewers among you may have figured out that s and t are both voiceless, and g and z are both voiced. In English, we alternate between the voiceless s plural and the voiced z plural based on how the word that it attached to ends. That is to say, if it ends with a voiced consonant, we say z, and if it ends with a voiceless consonant, we say s. Note that although these are two different sounds, they don't seem to affect English spelling. There's also another form, but we won't go into it here. I believe your textbook talks about it. The final popular example of English allomorphy that we'll talk about is with negation prefixes. That is, things like in, which mean not. The final consonant of this morpheme changes depending on what it attaches to. So we have words like impossible, illegal, irrespective, and indirect. Before a P, the in changes to im. Before an L, the final consonant of the in morpheme changes to an L. Before an R, it changes to an R, and before all other forms, it stays as in. This is very similar to the phonology examples that we saw. There's a context in which different forms occur, and there's even an elsewhere case. I'm going to end the video here. In the next video, we're going to be talking a bit more about roots, affixes, inflection, and derivation. And then in the video after that, we'll be talking about how we can solve morphological problem sets. So hopefully this video has given you a bit of an overview about what a morpheme is, and has let you see the sort of unit that we're going to be dealing with in this section of the class. I'll see you in the next video.